So please welcome Ashley Good.
All right, thank you for the warm introduction, and thank you to Shutterstock, Cosette, and in particular, Aline Alpus, who helped me with the art direction for this presentation. I'm going to start with a question. Can you tell me, what does it look like to fail? What do our bodies do when we fail? Just yell it out or show me, what does it look like to fail? What's that?
Panic.
Panic, sure. What do our bodies do?
Collapse.
Collapse, yeah.
Stress.
Sweat,
Cry.
cry. Totally. This here on the screen is Benjamin Zander. He is an educator and the conductor of the Boston Philharmonic Orchestra. And he has a few things to say on this topic, so I'm actually just going to call on him for a moment here to share his thoughts on what it looks like to fail.
They said, Mr. Zander, you have to understand, in Asia, it's very important to be right. The teacher is always right. And the students try to be right. And as one of these young ladies said, the best way to be right is not to say anything, then you won't be wrong. Now, I believe the exact opposite, which is you cannot learn anything unless you make a mistake. So I tell my students, when you make a mistake, celebrate. And the way to celebrate is like this. How fascinating! It's actually quite difficult. Try it out on the golf course next time you're out. You know why it's difficult is because when we make a mistake, we tend to pull down, the body pull down. Notice the next time you make a mistake, the body pulls down. Now, instead, when it pulls down, you go, how fascinating! It's like this. It's difficult to do, you know.
So perhaps you can guess what I'm about to ask you to do. That's right. Are you ready? On the count of 3, I want you all to think of a failure. All right, let yourself go back there, remember what it felt like, and instead of letting our bodies pull down, we're all going to yell, how fascinating. For real. And I get it, you know, you might be feeling a little bit weird or silly about it. It's okay, you can close your eyes so no one can see you. But on 3, we're going to do this. Are you ready? So think of your failure. And on 3, how fascinating. 1, 2, 3. How fascinating! Thank you all. The way that we instinctively deal with failure is so messed up, right? It's so negative. You know, you heard that in your answers to what it looks like to fail, and it's these negative reactions that really prevent us from harnessing that productive potential that sits in our failure. And this is what this talk is really about. It's about shaking that up, right? Trying to see failure in a totally new way, trying to see and experience failure differently. But this is an uphill battle because we are fighting against an education system that values testing over learning, organizations that treat us as human resources as opposed to resourceful humans, and our own neurobiological instincts that yes, are hardwired to learn, but are also hardwired to treat every single failure as a threat to our very survival. So I'm going to talk about all 3 of these things, education, organizations, and instincts separately, really in an effort to start to flip the idea of failure totally on its head. Starting with education. It was pretty early on that I learned in school that I was totally uncreative. My aptitude was tested, and as it turned out, I was awful at just about everything associated with creativity, right? Drawing, singing, painting, acting, music, dance, poetry, you name it, I sucked at it. And didn't actually matter that much, turned out okay, because our education system, quite honestly, tends to overvalue things that I was good at, science, math, which put me firmly in the science nerd category. But these these labels are ridiculous and totally unhelpful. Just because I am not traditionally creative doesn't mean I can't create. Right? And there is science and precision in the most beautiful works of art. And there is art and imagination and creativity in the most groundbreaking science. And I'm not for a moment trying to suggest that this is groundbreaking science, but in my grade 9 biology class, I decided to microwave my bean seeds. Honestly, I just wanted to see what would happen, and very secretly, I was kind of hoping they would mutate. But apparently, trying your best to create Teenage Mutant Ninja Beans does not actually earn you any marks at school. I was supposed to learn about, I don't know, photosynthesis, growing plants, whatever. I didn't. What I learned was that if you put seeds in the microwave, it stunts the growth of the plant. And anything over 25 seconds, seed doesn't germinate at all. I thought that was kind of cool, right? My teacher didn't. Because I was not supposed to do something new, right? I wasn't supposed to change the problem that I was solving. I was supposed to do what I was told. That's what I was going to be tested on. So when my seeds didn't grow because I had microwaved them, I failed. Which to me is one example amongst many of why we need to completely unlearn everything that school taught us about failure. Right? This idea of testing over learning is insane. It's totally insane. You'd think that all that the world asks of us was to be these automatons solving problems that millions of people had already solved before, asking no questions for 8 hours a day. Right? School has the tendency to teach us to be consumers, right? Consumers of knowledge. And we take in that information, then when we're asked, we spew it back out. And don't get me wrong, I love learning from others. I think it's great, love consuming knowledge, but that's all we're ever taught, right? When are we ever taught to self-authorize, to shake things up, to do things differently, right? To truly, truly create. Perhaps this audience needs this the least out of any audience I've ever spoken with, but I really want to encourage everyone here to not just see themselves as consumers, but as producers. Be a producer, right? It's scary, we're not taught how to do it. You might lose marks on your bean project, but the world needs more than automatons doing what they're told. We are not going to be able to imagine or discover the solutions to our most complex and important challenges if we are simply consuming. We need to self-authorize to solve the problems we haven't been told how to yet. And it's hard, right? It's hard because we put a piece of ourselves out there when we produce. It's not like consuming, right? When you consume, you take in the information, you repackage it, you put it back out there. It's fine. There's nothing of you in that. When you produce, it's you. You're putting it out there to be criticized and commented on. When I first started this business, I was working with this great designer who was helping me develop my logo. This is one of the drafts here. He sent me all these drafts for my logo. But I was still wrestling with that label of being uncreative and had this sense that I didn't know what looked good or not, or didn't have the ability to say what I liked. So I posted them all to Facebook, trying to crowdsource my opinion, which I thought was awesome. as all these comments started coming back in about what was good and what was not. I think this is great. But of course I thought that was great. Right? They weren't my designs. And when my designer saw the post, he was a little less than thrilled, and I get this kind of frustrated call. It's like, Ashley, you can't post those. They're drafts. And I get that, perhaps that was coming from a place of not wanting to have them out there before it's done, to not get it too attached to any one design, which would make it not change in the future. But I swear I heard something else in that phone call, and it was almost embarrassment or like fear of that criticism, right? As if he was saying, they're not ready yet, they're not perfect, people will criticize. And people did criticize. And I didn't think of it when I posted them because they weren't my designs, but I kind of get it now, right? It is hard for all of us, and not just designers, to put ourselves out there. School does not teach us that skill. All school teaches us about failure is to avoid it at all costs and to totally fear it because it comes with social exclusion and general worthlessness. So the first time I failed happened after I left school. I had this job working for a management consulting firm, doing a bunch of work in Fort McMurray. And 2008 happened. You know, our head office flies in, fires every single one of the senior managers in my office. I am the only person left who knows anything about our Fort McMurray work. And that was not a lot of knowledge. I happen to be wildly ambitious and idealistic and naive to a fault, which are great qualities if you want to create, but not really good if you've just been asked to run a multi-million-dollar audit for a giant oil and gas company. So I take on this project despite the fact that I was wildly underqualified and totally blind to all of the ways it could go wrong. It went wrong. I will spare you the gruesome details, but there is this one experience that just is burned on my memory. I'm sitting around the table, the boardroom table with the client, and the client is not happy. And I have my team there with me that I've haphazardly assembled. And I am stressed. I haven't slept, and my head is just spinning, you know, not thinking thoughts, but just hoping beyond hope that somebody on my team will have something that will get me out of this and fix it. And out of the mouths of one of my team members, instead of the wisdom or the reassurance that the client needed in that moment, the sound that comes out of my team member is a snore. He had fallen asleep reading. Fudge! It was awful. Needless to say, the client was not a client for very long after that. And to be honest, my organization didn't care. I don't know, maybe they had bigger things to worry about or knew that they were throwing me into the deep end, I'm not sure. But I cared. No. I did not handle this failure well and actually quit my job very shortly after that, simply out of the embarrassment and to escape that embarrassment of feeling incompetent. I hadn't ever been taught how to deal with failure. Right? I'd only ever been rewarded for my ambition. Everything I'd ever tried before that, it kind of worked out, so why wouldn't this, right? I didn't expect failure, and when it happened, I didn't have the language to talk about it, even to myself. And I don't think I'm alone in this. I want to ask, again, the audience, quick question here. I want you to think of a time that you failed on the job, and think about your reaction. And on this side of, imagine, I'm going to get you to answer by pointing. On this side of the room is the productive, learning, how fascinating response, best response you could have. And this is somewhere in the middle. And that side of the room is the defensive blame, I'm quitting out of embarrassment. And I'm just going to get you to think about your response to your failure and how would you rate yourself from how fascinating to quit out of embarrassment. Just point. Yeah. Cool. Neat. Okay, thank you. I would love you all to now reflect on how your organization responded. Right? From how fascinating to you're fired. Neat. I see, it's a bit hard to see in a room like this. Normally I get people moving around the room, but we don't have a lot of space. But I see this trend every time I ask that question. And it's this trend that we tend to be much harsher on ourselves and much harder on ourselves in times of failure than our organizations are. Who has worked at kind of your typical organization, the ones that you have to dress up for 9 to 5, Monday to Friday gigs? Just most? Okay, not everybody, but most people. Cool. I kind of expected that. I mean, the fact that you're here Friday at 9 a.m. tells me that most people, it might not still work at a place like that. That's great. But when I talk about organizations, for this presentation, I'm really referring to those typical organizations that the vast majority of the population work at, that runs our world, basically, and that we tend to give 50% of our waking hours to. So I'm going to continue this kind of question period. And similar to the last question, I'll frame the question in terms of the individual and then to the organization. And for those that have worked at kind of one of those typical organizations, I want you, when you think of your answer to the organizational question, to think of that more typical organizational experience. Scales change, ranges from agree to disagree and somewhere in the middle. So first question, we're good at this pointing thing now, we've had our practice round. So as an individual, it is important to me to take time for learning and reflection. Right, got a lot of agrees. Great. My organization values and creates time for learning and reflection. Yeah, a few more of these. Great. In times of failure, I focus on what I learned, never blame others. My organization has formal processes that are used to ensure learning from failures is maximized. No one ever feels blamed. So I could go on asking these questions, but I think the trend is pretty clear already. Why do our organizations end up less creative than us, than the people who make them up? Right? Why do our organizations treat us as human resources as opposed to resourceful humans? A big part of this is our organization's ability and willingness to take risks. But I really love the Seth Godin talk where he talks about how the riskiest thing you can do is to be safe. You need to be remarkable, is what he says. And organizations know this, right? So they're trying to find that balance between that need for innovation and newness and change and that accountability to providing value. That they've always had to. Right? And organizations are trying to do this. I worked with this one great group that invited me in to help them design their innovation strategy. And it was really exciting. They wanted to invest in, change their investment strategy because they wanted to invest in risky, early stage ideas, genuinely wanted to be leaders in innovation in their sector, really push the envelope, right? And they knew that would mean that they would have to start to change how they thought about failure because they were going to see a lot more failure. I thought, great, this is awesome, let's do this. But it wasn't too long till I was working with them. I was struck by this extreme absurdity. I was spending hours with these folks, planning and strategizing, trying to figure out what the most brilliant, flawless, complete innovation strategy would look like. And the absurdity that struck me was that we were trying to design the perfect plan to invest in imperfect ideas. It's as if we were saying, yes, innovate, just make sure nothing fails, right? It's totally impossible. And it took me a while to figure out how to talk about this kind of meta idea, but as far as I can tell, an innovation strategy should itself be innovative. Right? And that means that it's going to be flawed. And there is a need to just try things and see if they work and actually build adaptation into the strategy itself. But this is what we're bad at. Right? We designed everything, not just innovation strategies, everything, expecting they will work. And then we end up super frustrated and upset when they don't. And that's the struggle. So what's the solution? And I would suggest that we should be designing, when we're approaching complex problems, we should be designing expecting that it is that our solution is flawed, right? So we're expecting to have to continuously adapt everything that we create. Engineers Without Borders is, in fact, the organization I've been working with the longest, over 5 years now. And actually, this whole failure business got started while I was working with them and leading their annual Engineers Without Borders failure report here. So this is clearly an organization who, more than any other that I've worked with, really recognizes that the complexity of the problems they are trying to solve means that there will be failure in just about everything that they do. So they're looking for it, right? Right from the field level to the CEO level, watching for failure. And the CEO, George Roeder, invited me into the organization last year to help them deepen their learning and maximize what they could learn from a particularly harsh failure. To summarize what happened, basically, cash flow had been poorly managed, revenues had been over-projected, and there was a change in accounting staff around that time that left them totally blind to those facts for a number of months. Constrained financial resources, which led to a couple of people who had to be laid off, which is awful, right? Like, terrible failure. So they really wanted to figure out what happened, why it happened, and grow stronger as an organization. So I go in and I'm leading this Blameless post-mortem process, having all these one-on-one interviews with about a dozen staff who were involved in the failure. And out of this, I come up with these wonderful recommendations for how to create a stronger organization out of these 34 action item to-do list, things like how to create a safe space for challenging and questioning and transparency and transitions and cash flow modeling and all that good stuff that you'd want to have a strong organization. But there was another list that no one saw. Because as I was having those one-on-one meetings, yes, I heard lots of ideas, getting to the root of what happened, understand how to make the organization stronger, but almost as frequently, I heard criticism specifically directed at George, at the leadership, right? So on one hand, I'm holding this list of 34 action items for the organization. On the other hand, I'm holding this list of all the ways that George's staff thought he was failing. And I looked at this list and I'm like, this is awesome. Like, this is so valuable for a CEO. This is information that leaders never, ever get. This unfiltered, uncensored, and totally anonymous criticism and feedback. So I make a meeting with George, right? Get him on the phone. He's a busy guy, so I get right to the point. Hey, George, I have this 34 action item list. I'll have it in a report, presented on Monday, it'll be all good. But I also have this list of all the ways your staff thinks you're failing. Item 1. To his great credit, George sat through over a half an hour of criticisms on that phone call. Can you imagine the strength and the courage that took? Most of us, take great strides to make sure that we never find out that we are the cause of the problem. Right? We surround ourselves with people that agree with us. We take in information sources that reinforce beliefs we already hold. It takes a certain kind of person to actively seek out criticism like that. Right? But those are the leaders, the people that our organizations need most. There are a bunch of very well-studied neurobiological reasons why most of us do not react to failure as productively as George did. Loss aversion, cognitive dissonance, bifurcated thinking, confirmation bias, science, blah, 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 whatever. Save you the details. Suffice it to say, in many ways, we are hardwired to react to failure dysfunctionally. One of the most enlightening and infuriating experiences I ever had was taking an improv workshop. The instructor started off by saying, you will fail at this. And it doesn't matter. I'm thinking, great, right up my alley, let's get started. I'm sitting in a circle, and we're all there, and we're building this scene with all the participants, and I am standing there totally plagued by all that horrible self-talk and labels that I talked about before. Oh God, I'm not creative, I can't act, I'm not funny, I'm not imaginative, like, ah! And I am absolutely sweating and near freak out when I am picked. So, think about that for a second. I was told that I would fail. I was told it wouldn't matter. And I was in a room of people who were also failing and also knew it didn't matter, and I still freaked out. Right? All that logic didn't matter, and I totally froze, and I couldn't come up with anything to say, let alone anything funny. I was that nervous when I was expecting to fail, and it didn't matter. Can you imagine how bad I am when I don't expect to fail and it does matter? That was truly the infuriating part. The enlightening part is that I had this kind of like light bulb goes on, and I realized that most of what we do is a lot like improv, and that in the grand scheme of things, doesn't really matter. Right? And we are probably going to fail at it at some point or another in some way. Right? So we really need to learn how to not freak out. I, as Kyle mentioned in his intro, am a full-time failure. This is my job. I think about failure, I know it's kind of amazing. I think about failure all day, every day. This is what I do, and I still react dysfunctionally when I fail. Right? So I can say with a fair amount of confidence that no amount of research or studying or logic is going to get you out of these instinctive responses and these hardwired instincts, right? The best we can do is to start to practice controlling how we act and how we react to those instincts. A few months ago, I was called out on Twitter for failing to cite the work of Amy Edmondson, this great Harvard prof that I totally look up to. As far as criticisms go, tweet was quite generous, to be honest. It said something along the lines of, I mean, you can read it here, like, I would like @failforward even more if she cared to attribute ideas at Amy Edmondson. So, kind of generous. But Amy Edmondson, you have to understand, when I started this work, like, she's my hero. I read all of her stuff. Her work was so influential on my thinking. And to make it worse, I was actually at Harvard the day that tweet was sent, speaking at a conference there, and really hoping to meet with Amy while I was in town. So this tweet was bad, bad for getting that meeting. So I reacted badly, right? Super defensively, and right away I wrote back this tweet that was basically like, oh my gosh, like I always try to cite, like where did I miss it? I'll fix it right away kind of language, right? Clearly trying to protect myself. Half an hour later, I am still thinking about that tweet. And I had to laugh at myself, right? Again, struck by the absurd that I had reacted exactly how I suggest people shouldn't react in times of failure. Because with that kind of emotional, instinctive, amygdala, lizard brain, whatever you want to call it, response over, I could honestly reflect and say, like, yeah, I had become really lax at citing people's work, not just Amy Edmondson's, right? And I needed to get better at that, if I was really honest with myself. So I wrote a second tweet exactly 25 minutes later as I'm still thinking about this. That was much more rational and aligned with my viewpoint. That was, at Komitani. Also, I know I've been slack on this. Thanks for the gentle nudge to improve. This is important because if I had stayed with that first tweet, I wouldn't have really learned anything, right? Maybe I would have changed that one place that @Komitani found, but I wouldn't have, nothing really would have changed. But this is what we do, right? We react, we find out we failed, we react quickly, try to deal with it as fast as we can, which often means dealing with it in unhelpful and in a way that undermines our learning at best and is harmful and blames others at worst. But I'd like to suggest that it's this awareness that these are instinctive response, that hardwired instinct, that is going to happen. Right? You will have that defensive mechanism kick in, but it's awareness that that will happen that allows you not to act, possibly not to send that first tweet when it's happening. Wait for that emotion to pass, and then react as yourself, as you would want to. And just as important, that awareness allows us to see when others are reacting defensively, right? And forgive them. Because we know that we react like that too, right? We can see someone reacting defensively when they possibly should be taking responsibility for the failure. Forgive them. We know it's going to happen. Walk away. Come back, perhaps about 25 minutes later, and ask them to talk about it then. Our education, organizations, instincts are all working against us to deal with failure intelligently. But we can, and it is possible to change that. We can self-authorize to create and produce and value learning over testing. We can design our projects knowing that our solutions to our complex problems are going to be flawed, so we design them to adapt, and we courageously seek out criticisms and feedback. And finally, we can build our awareness and acceptance that we're going to have negative reactions to failure, and so start to improve our own reactions and understand the actions of others. Sadly, that is not quite enough, because I swear that I try to do all that stuff all day, every day, and failure still sucks. It still sucks, because I am, in my work, trying to create a market for a product of learning to deal with failure productively, while I am trying to figure out what that product is. The notion of riding the bicycle uphill as you build it, I'm sure resonates with many people in the audience. So you will understand when I say that a lot of the time, that makes you feel so inadequate. Right? I feel like I am just making it up as I go along, which I am most of the time. And sometimes I make it up and it works, and sometimes I make it up when it doesn't. And when it doesn't work, God, it sucks. And I come home and I just think, I'm awful at my job. And I'm not smart enough, and I'll never figure it out, and I'm just constantly failing, and it sucks. And this brings me back to where I started the presentation, really flipping the idea of failure on its head. We, everyone, we need to start thinking about failure differently. Right? And changing that narrative of, I'm a failure, I shouldn't do this because the problem's too hard and I don't know the answer and I'm not smart enough. And we need to flip that and turn it into something that sounds more like, man, we've got a lot of hard problems out there. So I am going to create and try and do new things, and I am going to learn from those experiments and tests. We can choose to see failure as a teachable moment. Just as we can choose to see a young woman or an old lady in this picture. And failure as a teachable moment means that we reward ourselves for learning and effort, not just outcomes or the right answer or the tallest bean plant. And we have to do this. We have to, because failing means that you are doing something interesting. Everything great that was ever accomplished came from a risk, right? And it's almost too obvious to say it like that, because if it was easy and success was guaranteed, there wouldn't be anything special in it. And perhaps Tom Hanks in the movie A League of Their Own said it best when he said, "It's supposed to be hard. If it wasn't hard, everyone would do it. The hard is what makes it great." I have one more question for you guys. And you don't have to answer out loud or point or anything like that. It's just for reflection, right? I have spent the last 33 minutes talking about failure and trying to see it differently. How are you taking that forward? How are you going to remember to keep a space for failure? Right? How are you going to remember to see failure differently in your day-to-day? That's it. Thanks.